A nobiliary particle is used in a surname or family name in many Western cultures to signal the nobility of a family. The particle used varies depending on the country, language and period of time. However, in some languages the nobiliary particle is the same as a regular prepositional particle that was used in the creation of many surnames. In some countries it became customary to distinguish the nobiliary particle from the regular one by different spelling, although in other countries these conventions did not arise, occasionally resulting in ambiguity. Denmark and Norway. In Denmark and Norway one distinguishes between nobiliary particles and a preposition denoting a place of residence. Nobiliary particles like ef, von, and are an integrated part of family names. The use of predicates was no particular privilege for the nobility, but on the other hand almost exclusively used by and associated with them. Especially in the late 17th century and the 18th century one would often receive a predicate together with one's older new name when a noble. Examples of families like de Gide and Parmand, with two predicates, von Monthey F. Morgenstern. Prominent non-noble families having used predicates of von Capellen, von der Leep, and de Craigie dit La Roche. The preposition till is placed behind a person's full name in order to denote his or her place of residence, for example Sigurd Johnson till Sudrime. France. In France the particle de precedes a nom de terre in many families of the French nobility. A few do not have this particle. The particle can also be du, or des. In French, de indicates a link between the land and a person, either landlord or peasant. Never in French history was this particle proof of nobility. The nobleman was always designated an esquire, or better, a chevalier. Only knights could be designated by the spoken style Monseigneur or Messire, as, for example, Monseigneur Bertrand du Guesclin, Chevalier. So, in fact and by convention, surnames with the non-noble use of the particle are spelled as a single word, though many such conserved the de as a separate word. For the 16th century, surnames among the French nobility have often been composed of a combination of patronymic names, titles, or noms de terre joined by the preposition de, as in Charles Maurice de Talleyrand Périgord. The use of this particle began to be an essential appearance of nobility, but, after the end of the Kingdom of France, the use of de has not invariably evidenced nobility, as shown in Valéry Giscard d'Estaing's grandfather's change of name in the early 20th century. Even earlier in the 18th and 19th centuries many middle-class families simply adopted the particle without being ennobled. Maximilian Robespierre's family, for example, used the particle for some generations. Spain. In Spain, the nobiliary particle de is also used in two different styles. The first is a patronymic de toponymic formula, as used by, among others, the 15th century general Gonzalo Fernández de Córdoba, the 14th century chronicler and poet Pero López de Ayala, the European discoverer of the Eastern Pacific, Vasco Núñez de Balboa, and many other conquistadors. The second style is use of the particle de before the entire surname. This style resembles but is more ambiguous than the French one, since there is no convention for a different spelling when the de is simply a prepositional particle in non-noble toponymic names such as de la Rue, or de la Tour. Examples of nobility particle de without patronymic include the 16th century first Marquis of Santa Cruz, Alvaro de Bazan, the conquistador Hernando de Soto, and the styling of the King of Spain as Juan Carlos de Bourbon, a common tradition in Spanish culture. Unlike French, Spanish lacks elision, and so no contraction is used when the surname starts with a vowel, but contraction is used when the surname includes the article el, as in Baltasar del Alcázar. A Spanish law on name surnames, from 1958 and still in force, does not allow a person to add a "de" to the surname if it does not already have it. The law does allow for one exception. A "de" may be added in front of a surname that could be otherwise misunderstood as a forename. Conclusive proof of the nobility of a surname can be determined by establishing whether that surname is associated with a blazon, since for centuries coats of arms have been borne legally only by persons of noble condition. Surnames composed of two names linked by a hyphen, implying that equal importance is given to both families, do not indicate nobility. For example, the hyphenated surname Suarez Llanos does not indicate nobility. Germany and Austria. In Germany and Austria, von Isu generally precedes the surname of a noble family. If it is justified, they can be used together. The present ruler of Liechtenstein, for example, is Johannes Adam Ferdinand Alois Joseph Maria Marco Daviano Pius von Unzu-Liechtenstein. As in France and Spain, not all noble families use a nobiliary particle. The names of the most ancient nobility, the Uradel, but also names of some old untitled nobility, are often do not contain the particle von Isu, such as Grote, Niger, Vink. Conversely, the prefix von occurs in the names of 200 to 300 non-noble families, much like van in the Netherlands, especially in northwestern Germany and in German-speaking Switzerland. Van is a frequent element in non-noble surnames. In Austria and Bavaria, non-noble surnames containing von were widely altered by compounding it to the main surname element in the 19th century, such as von Verden. England and Wales. In the Middle Ages, the words "the" borrowed from Latin and French, and the English "of" were often used in names in England and Wales, as in Simon de Montfort and Richard of Shrewsbury. However, the usage of "the" is often misunderstood, as in most cases it was used only in documents written in Latin or French. At the time, in translating into English, "de" was sometimes converted into "of" and sometimes omitted. Only rarely was it used in the English form of a name. It is also significant that both "de" and "of" were used simply to show topological origin in the names of people of all classes, so that in England and Wales neither "de" nor "of" should be looked on as in themselves nobiliary. Despite the lack of official significance of the words "de" or "of" in names, there was sometimes a perception that these words connoted nobility. For example, on the 8th of October 1841, a month after Thomas Trafford was created the first Baronet de Trafford, Queen Victoria issued a royal license to Sir Thomas Joseph Trafford, that he may henceforth resume the ancient patronymic of his family, by assuming and using the surname of de Trafford, instead of that of Trafford, and that such surname may be henceforth taken and used by his issue. The Anglicization to Trafford had probably occurred in the 15th century, when the Norman article de, signifying that a family originated from a particular place, was generally dropped in England. The resumption of such older versions of family names was a romantic trend in 19th century England, encouraged by a mistaken belief that the article de indicated nobility. In modern times, a nobiliary particle is rarely used. More usual is the territorial designation, which in practice is almost identical. Scotland. In Scotland, there is strictly no nobiliary particle, but the use of the word "of" as a territorial designation has a long history. In this usage, "of" and a place name follow on from a family surname, as in the name Aeneas MacDonald of Glengarry. Recognition of a territorial designation is granted in Scotland by the Lord Leon to Scottish armigers who own or were born in or are associated with named land. generally in a rural area not forming part of a town. The Lord Lyon advises that for a territorial designation to be recognized there must be ownership of a substantial area of land to which a well-attested name attaches, that is to say, ownership of an estate, or farm, or, at the very least, a house with policies extending to 5 acres or thereby. The territorial designation in this case is considered to be an indivisible part of the name, not in itself necessarily indicating historical feudal nobility, but recognition in a territorial designation is usually accorded alongside the grant or matriculation of a Scottish coat of arms, which effectively confers or recognizes minor nobility status, even if not ancient. Despite this, the right to bear a territorial designation can also exist for landowners who are not armigerous. However, this right is not made good until receiving official recognition. Lerny comments, mere assumption is not sufficient to warrant these territorial and chiefly names. A person bearing a Scottish territorial designation is either a feudal baron, chief, a chieftain, or a laird, the latter denoting landowner, or is a descendant of one of the same. The Lord Lyon is the ultimate arbiter as to determining entitlement to a territorial designation, and his right of discretion in recognizing these, and the status as a name, dignity, a title, have been confirmed in the Scottish courts. In speech correspondence, a laird is correctly addressed by the name of his estate or his surname with designation, e.g. William Maitland of Lethington would be addressed as Lethington, or Maitland of Lethington. Switzerland. In Switzerland, Brevant precedes a noble name, depending on the canton of origin. Portugal. In Portugal there are not, and never were, any special naming conventions to show nobility. Personal titles like Dom may be used by the clergy, for instance, before the Christian name, not implying nobility, except if one previously knows the name as belonged to a commoner. Furthermore, Portuguese nobility is traditionally recognized just to people being born to 4 noble quarters. Both had fathers and both had mothers must have been noble for the grandson or granddaughter to be considered a noble at birth, independently of any noble name, with or without particle. Portuguese surnames do not indicate nobility, as usually the same surnames exist in noble and non-noble families. The restriction to nobility and the clergy of bearing arms at the beginning of the 16th century, when King Manuel I extinguished the previous bourgeoisie armorial, usually shows someone to be noble if he or she bears personal or family arms. But nobility in Portugal was never restricted to the bearers of arms, and many Portuguese nobles did not or do not have arms at all. The articles de and its different orthographic forms, like in France, do not indicate nobility in the bearer. Portuguese modern law recognizes to any citizen the right not to sign those articles, even if they are present in their identification documents, and the opposite right is legally allowed to those Portuguese citizens who, not having in the documentation any such prepositions, are able to sign it if they wish. In fact, articles and prepositions are considered in Portuguese nomenclature just as an embellishment to any name. Good taste made usually Portuguese nobility reduce prepositions linking the many surnames, signing just one at the beginning of the name, and then the last surname being preceded by e, not to repeat the preposition. For instance, the name João Duarte da Silva dos Santos da Costa de Souza may also legally be signed João Duarte Silva Santos Costa Souza. Tradition and good taste should make him sign just João Duarte da Silva Santos Costa e Souza, the last, and substitutes all previous surnames prepositions except the first one, and cannot ever be used without a previous preposition to justify it. An exception to this rule is only shown with duplicate surnames linked by and. For instance, when the maternal surnames come before the paternal ones, Diogo Afonso da Conceição e Silva Tavares da Costa. For the 19th century on, it became customary for Portuguese titled nobility to socially indicate the title as a subsidiary surname. For instance, Joaquim Dias Tavares dos Santos e Silva. This social rule does not apply to members of the Portuguese royal house. Other countries, although many languages have nobiliary particles, the use may sometimes be misleading, as it often does not give any evidence of nobility. Some examples are Latin America. Brazil continued to recognize the distinction of nobility longer than its republican neighbors, since it remained a monarchy until 1889. But it has also been a republic ever since. Nobility in Brazil took the special Portuguese ways, with the only distinction that in the Brazilian Empire titles and simple nobility were conferred only on a personal basis, and were not legally able to be transmitted to their offspring, unlike Portugal. In fact, differently from colonial nobility, the Brazilian Empire nobility was awarded as a private and personal condecoration for one lifetime, even if some of the Brazilian titles, in some very rare cases, were again conferred to one or two more generations. Spanish-speaking countries other than Spain use the particle "de" without legally meaning nobility, with only a few short-lived exceptions. All Spanish-American countries adopted a republican form of government and abolished noble distinctions. Laws on names vary in Latin America, but occasionally people are able to fashion new surnames that may sound noble. An example is Javier Pérez de Cutellar, whose father, Ricardo Pérez de Cutellar, decided to permanently combine his last names as a more distinguishable paternal last name for his offspring. Italy. The nobiliary particles "da" are used after the surname or the name of the title. "Da" is sometimes contracted when the surname begins with a vowel, in accordance with Italian orthography. An example of nobility is the name of the noted writer Giuseppe Tomasi di Lampedusa, where Tomasi is the surname and Lampedusa was the family's feudal property. An ordinary use is found in the name of the American actor Leonardo DiCaprio, of Italian descent. However, the surnames of certain Italian noble families are by the nature toponymic, reflecting the names of medieval feudal properties, e.g. di Savoia, d'Aquino. Further, the use of the particle "da" or "da" is often an abbreviation for dei, suggesting the family is of a noble family. For instance, Lorenzo de' Medici means Lorenzo of the Medici, Netherlands. The particle van is not an indicator of nobility. The percentage of van-preceded surnames that are noble is not significantly higher than that of any other surname. They are evenly spread over the social strata. However, the particles "tot" and "tho", historically meaning "at" and related to German zu, are a strong indicator of nobility if combined with van in a surname, such as van Vorst tot Vorst. Note that many noble families in the Netherlands have non-noble branches that are closely related and share the same surname. Double surnames are, therefore, a weak but significant indicator of nobility. Many patrician and other families have double names as well. Somalia, the nobiliary particle is or meaning honorable, venerable, or simply sir, reserved for learned Islamic clerics, and used throughout the Somali territories. During his research in the ancient town of Ahmad, the historian G. W. B. Huntingford noticed that whenever an old site had the prefix "or" in its name, it denoted the final resting place of a local saint. Belgium. The words "de", "der", and "van" may be nobiliary particles, but as in the Netherlands they are more often not of nobiliary origin, so are not in themselves evidence of nobility. Sweden. Some noble families use "af" as a nobiliary particle. This is the pre-1906 spelling of the modern Swedish have, and corresponds to the German von. However, von has also been used in some noble families, some of German and some of Swedish origin. Thus Carl Linnaeus, upon his ennoblement, took the name Carl von Linné. The particles af and von do not have to be used with a toponym, they can simply be attached to the pre-noble surname. The word de has also been used in some families descended from 17th-century immigrants of craftsmen and others from Wallonia in present-day Belgium. A well-known example is the de Geer family. Other examples include de Reitz and de Bescher. Finland, the Old Swedish form af and the German von, denoting descent or location, are used in some noble families. Thailand. Thai language na may be granted by a Taimonic to form a Thai family name signifying of a former kingdom, a tributary state of Siam. Examples: Na Ayodhya, putative royal lineage in the Ayutthaya kingdom that may be granted after marriage into the royal Chakri dynasty.